Welcome to Plant Your Seed. I'm your host, Fred Ferris. On each episode, we share stories of how ordinary people have transformed their lives. Each story is compassionate, each story is authentic, and each story is a transformation. Here are the stories of the people who are changing our world by transitioning to a plant-based diet. Today on Plant Your Seed, we are doing something a little bit different. We're catching up with a previous guest and find out what's been happening in their life since we first had them on the podcast. Joining us today from New Jersey, we have Laura Carney. When we last chatted with Laura, she was in the midst of finishing her father's bucket list, which she found among his things after he passed. Welcome back, Laura.
Oh, it's great to be here. It's nice seeing you again.
Yeah, thanks for being here on Plant Your Seed. Now, before we get into your latest adventures, can you remind everybody about your vegan journey and how you became vegan?
Yeah, I'd love to. I became vegan in the second year of my experience checking off my dad's bucket list. It's interesting because a lot of the bucket list required travel, and I was finding that I was eating crappy food a lot when I was traveling. And so it probably couldn't have happened at a better time. But I also was a runner. I was a long distance runner. And one of the things that always kept me from going vegan was that I was afraid I wouldn't get the protein, like the myth that everybody spreads all the time.
Sure.
But my husband was vegan, and he had been vegan for about 8 years. And so what ended up starting to happen was we would always eat vegan at home. But then when I was at work or, anywhere else, I would be eating a tuna sandwich or something. Like I would still eat quote unquote normal food.
Right.
And, as I considered it then, of course, now it's not like that for me. He didn't really force it on me. He was never trying to convince me to do it. And I had an experience where I was at a family party and I had found out that someone I was related to was still texting and driving. And, the reason initially I set out to do my dad's bucket list was because I wanted to educate people about the way he died, because he did die because of a teenager who was driving while making a phone call. Mm-hmm. So when I found that out, I didn't even take a beat. Like if you get angry, you're supposed to take a minute. And I didn't do that. And I just flipped out and was just like, what? I can't believe you're still doing this. And, how could you still be doing this when I've educated people and I've done TV shows, et cetera. And now I'm doing my dad's bucket list, and that's how devoted I am. And really, he didn't mean anything by it. It was just a thing that people did. And I'm sure because it was convenient to people to do it, they just did it, even if they knew about it, what harm it could cause.
Right.
And I was very bummed out that I had acted that way with someone I loved. But I was also bummed out because I thought, how could it be that I have had a personal experience with this and I'm educating people and they might not get it. They might still be doing something that could be harmful. And Steven said, well, I've told you about factory farming, but you still eat meat. And like something clicked in my head. Like, oh my God, he's right. I've watched some of these videos, like I've read the articles, I agree with him. I know what goes on. I can't claim ignorance about it. And if I couldn't claim ignorance, then what was my reason? And beyond the running thing, beyond thinking I wouldn't have enough strength to run, it was just convenience. It was, I'm doing what everybody else does.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure was the reason my family member was texting and driving. So it was like I made this connection all of a sudden in my head that, maybe I needed to stop going around and lecturing people about their behavior in hopes that I could help them to change. And maybe I just needed to be the change. Right. And that's how my husband was as a vegan. He wasn't a person who lectured people. He wasn't someone who criticized anyone or judged them. He was just like, hey, this is what works for me. And it occurred to me, like, that's what you can do. You can be almost like a walking advertisement for a better life. And it changed everything. I mean, really going vegan it changed how I write. It changed how I work. It changed how I advocate. It changed everything, how I live.
Okay. So now that everyone's caught up on your vegan story, let's get on to the good stuff. Let's get on to your book. It's My Father's List, How Living My Dad's Dream Set Me Free. Remind everyone how you found your father's bucket list and what about the list made you want to finish it.
My brother found it, actually. My brother lives in Amesbury. Now, he was living in Salem in Massachusetts at the time. And he had just bought his first house and he was about to get married. And Stephen and I had just gotten married ourselves. And
Mm-hmm.
we were up there visiting him to congratulate him on the house. And he's like, "Hey, I found something in the move. Have you ever seen this before? Do you know about this?" And it was what appeared to be a list of life goals that my dad wrote. And we found out later he wrote it in 1978, right after I was born. And my
Mm-hmm.
mom was the only one who knew about it. But people didn't really use the term bucket list then. So I don't think
Right.
he would have even been thinking about his imminent death, like he was just some people have said they thought maybe I like my birth inspired it because
Mm-hmm.
it might have made him think about his mortality, and like, oh, maybe my life is a little more important now. So as soon as we saw it, I had been at that time kind of going through something. I was really afraid of getting married in some ways because my parents divorced when I was 6.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, what if that happens to us? We'd already been together 13 years. Like what if like having rings on our fingers is going to make us feel like suffocated or something,
Right.
or what if like there's duties a wife is supposed to perform and I'm just not capable of that. Like those were the kinds of things I was worried about. And then all of a sudden I started noticing everyone around me, it wasn't enough that I finally had the wedding. It was sort of like, well, now when are you gonna have a kid and when are you gonna buy a house? And it's like, God, these questions are never gonna end. Like the
Right.
pressure to be a certain way will never end. So I was really feeling lost, almost like a misfit. Like I wanted to start writing more,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe about bigger things than I'd been writing about. And I was very excited about my career and getting published more. And I couldn't figure out how am I going to do that and also still satisfy these, supposed like requirements of womanhood.
Mm-hmm.
So when I found the list, I was going through that, and to be reminded in a way of what my dad valued in life really helped me because it was just, oh, right. Like he was really creative and he cared about going on adventures. And he had a short life if you think about it, because he died at 54, but boy, he really loved being alive, like
Right.
he knew how to have fun. So I think as soon as I saw it, that was really what instigated this flashbulb moment of, yes, I need to do this. I need to finish this. And then I wanted to write a book about it.
Now, what were some of the items on the list?
They really ran the gamut. Things as impossible seeming as correspond with the Pope and talk with the president, to grow a watermelon, or plant an
Hmm.
apple tree. And some of them were really sweet. Like he wrote that he wanted to give his children the best example, the best education, and most love that he could give. And he
Hmm.
said he wanted to make his spouse feel happy, healthy, pretty, and young every day of her life. So and then he had career goals. He wanted to write and have a few novels published. He wanted to have 5 songs recorded. He was kind of a jack of all trades kind of person. So
Hmm.
these were just all little things that I'm sure he thought would be a cool experience, like go to the Super Bowl, like a once in a lifetime type of thing, or just a skill he wanted to develop. He wanted to type 40 words a minute accurately. like like they're really like just the size of them just ranges. And he had checked off 5 of them. He checked off to a comedy monologue in a nightclub, which I always joke, like, thank God, because that I feel like I wouldn't have wanted to do that. But he was naturally very funny, so I'm sure he was fine.
Mm.
Helped my parents enjoy their retirement, develop an impressive record collection, which my brother and I were the lucky beneficiaries of.
Mm.
And what else did he do? Be interviewed on a radio program. Oh, you would like this one. He wanted to go to a World Series game. And
Ah,
he did. He saw Toronto play Philadelphia. And I mean, that was the thing that when we saw it, my brother was like, oh, yeah, I remember when he did that.
right.
So, and we noticed he had written like different colored ink.
Hmm.
So that was the thing that made us know, oh, he was keeping this the whole time and just not telling anybody about it.
What did you find to be the most challenging of the things on the list?
I think the things that required that I trust myself were the
Mm.
most challenging, that were things that other people had made me believe were impossible to do, like correspond with the Pope, like talk with the president, like write and have a few novels published.
Hmm.
even the Super Bowl, quite honestly, like there are so many things that you could do with your life that have been lifted to such a level of like, impossibility
Right.
when they're really not. Like all I had to do for the Super Bowl was call a guy from the NFL who sold tickets that I found on a website, and
Mm.
he helped me create a plan where I paid it in installments. So it was
No.
fine.
Yeah.
But I think when you think of certain things, it's like, God, that's such a big thing to do. I can't even wrap my head around how to do it. So really, yeah, it was stuff like that where I had to turn off the noise, really. I had to just say, whatever, okay, look, whatever I believed before I started this project doesn't apply right
Right.
now, like I had to be open to whatever was coming my way. And after a while, I started understanding that really a lot of what the list was doing was it was teaching me things that he would have been here teaching me had he
Mm.
lived. Or even had already taught me once before and I forgot, and he always said I was very hard to coach, so that made sense.
Can you give us an example of that, of some of those things?
Sure. Let's see. Okay, so when I checked off swim the width of a river, I couldn't help but remember how I hated doing the back float. Like he couldn't get me to relax enough to
Mm.
let like the water would seep in my ears. And he loved doing like the backstroke was like his favorite stroke, I think, because it's like so relaxing.
Yeah.
But I would just like freak out, because I was a very like anxious kid. And as I was like in this, I did it in this river called the French Broad in North Carolina, and the current was really crazy when we were there. It was just really rough. And at one point I just stopped. Like I just held on to this rock and I let it just like let the water push past my body. And immediately like my mind went back to that, like, oh,
Mm.
right. Like I'm finally doing a backflip, like I can't help but have the water get in my ears here. It's just a part of it, and just little, it was things like that, just little, phobias. And I mean, with writing the book, well, I don't want to say phobias because those are pretty severe, but just little fears that I had that I didn't know that I had. With writing the book, I was so like, I kept getting in my head, like, how could a journalist or an essayist write a whole book? Like this is crazy. Like, how am I going to learn how to do this? I'm not a memoirist. And I made myself do it anyway, and I learned how to do it. I taught myself how to do it and, read a lot about it and figured it out. And I'll never forget after I finished my first 250 pages, it was my first draft.
Mm-hmm.
And I was ready to turn it in to my agent. And I had kept like this briefcase of his that was supposed to be like a reward because I knew it was the only thing I had left of his that I didn't know what was in there.
Mm-hmm.
Although at the same time, like things have popped up along the way, like little notebooks that I didn't even know existed. So who knows? Maybe there's something else.
Mm.
But I opened the briefcase and I was completely expecting to just find, a bunch of his writing like I had been finding. And instead, it was everything I'd ever written
Hmm.
was in this briefcase. Like like way, even back to like history term papers in high school, articles I did in college, poems, like he had kept everything.
Wow.
So for me, that moment was like, oh no, like it's on you now. Almost like his spirit was saying, you've had the ability the whole time. You could do this the whole time. You've always done this. And getting like emotional thinking about it. It was very like, Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, like you've always had the power to go home. You just
Right.
didn't know it. You had to learn that you did. So really a lot of the list was like that.
Now, how did that make you feel when you opened up that briefcase and you looked in, you saw all this stuff that you had done that you had no idea that he kept?
Yeah, it was it just was stunning. I always thought of my dad as a very independent person, much more into pursuing his goals and his dreams than a lot of adults I knew. So to realize, I mean, he always was, vocal about supporting my writing and
Mm-hmm.
encouraging me. But a lot of it though would be critical. Like he was kind of hard on me with it sometimes, and
Mm.
I'd be like, geez, like even down to like my handwriting and something. Like I can barely
Right.
read that. Meanwhile, his handwriting was like terrible.
So sort of tough love, huh?
Well, that's what it was. It was him encouraging me because he knew I was he believed that I was good
Right.
and he wanted me to get better. And that's what, when someone is a coach and they see that in you, that if they're a good coach, that's what they do.
How has working on this book changed your life?
Completely. I laugh about it now, but I remember before starting the list, I think it was probably the year before, we were planning our wedding, and I had pitched an article idea to Nate Silver's 538, which was like as part of the New York Times. Like he
Mm-hmm.
kind of started his own thing. But it was like a website that was all about statistics and how statistics make the news. And I had this idea. I had been recapping Mad Men, the TV show,
Mm-hmm.
and I had this crazy idea, like, well, what if I went back and I looked at like every ad in every woman's magazine to see, like, is it actually true that there was a point in time where we switched from making women feel like they had to be domestic goddesses to making them feel like they had to be sex pots. Like
Mm.
that's really what I wanted to see. Like at what point did beauty become the thing that was controlling us?
Mm-hmm.
And I went to the library in New York every single weekend for like 3 months. That's how I did it. And I would find myself just apologizing to my husband, like, "Oh my God, is this okay? I'm so sorry. Like I have to go and spend this time doing this." And he'd be like, "What is wrong with you? You're a writer." Like I
Right.
understand that you're going to have projects, and that's who I was then. I thought it wasn't okay. But now I recognize that I married someone who understands that you have to put time into the work that you're doing, and sometimes that means isolation, and that's all right. It's all right to do that, and I do the same for him. So why shouldn't he do it for me? So I've we've always been that way, but I had never had something this big to do. So that's been a real eye opener for me. That it's okay to take the time that you need to take to make something if you're an artist, and also that I am an artist, that's who I am, and that's valuable, and I need to treat it with dignity instead of treating it, because I think a lot of people are artists and they think it's different, or they think it's weird, and they don't figure out how to make room for it in their lives, and instead they put a lot of focus on trying to fit in with people who aren't. So you really, like, there's a discipline to it, just like with running and anything else.
Now, the title of your book is My Father's List: How Living My Dad's Dreams Set Me Free. How did living your dad's dreams set you free?
How did it set me free? Well, it just removed so many limiting beliefs. I don't want to ruin the book, Fred.
Yeah, I'm not saying that. I'm just kind of curious on what have you learned personally from this experience? What was the most surprising thing that you learned about yourself during this whole endeavor?
I mean, it's so many things, and everyone who reads the book, I think, has an interesting, like a different take on it, like how
Mm-hmm.
it has affected, like how they relate to it in their own lives. But if I were to narrow it down to just one, I mean, I think this is a common thing that people do. I think we build these prisons for ourselves that we don't know we're building.
Mm.
And it's just beliefs, like beliefs that we have about what our life could be and what we think we are, what we think we're capable of. All the time you'll hear about someone saying, "I want to write a book," and then they won't do it because it's like, well, I don't know how I'd find the time. What if I can't? And really, I think it just comes down to that, like this fear of rejection, this fear of humiliation,
Mm-hmm.
which I had to face many, many times. And it became double for me, because not only would I be humiliating myself, but I would be humiliating my dad, because this
Mm.
was his idea. And what if I couldn't, what if my writing couldn't live up to the idea? So I mean, but at the same time, having this be his list and his dreams and my desire to give him almost like to give him a transition to the other side that felt more peaceful and
Mm.
calmer and more loving than a car crash did to me. My desire to do that was what kept me going, what kept me doing it. It forced me to face fears that normally would have stopped me in my tracks. And because of that, I got to have this incredible gift of this knowledge that, I think it's called, I was reading about this the other day. Florence Scovel Shinn wrote this book about New Thought in the early 1900s. And she said there's this thing called the law of non-resistance,
Mm.
where if you decide that you're afraid something's going to happen, like the example she was giving was a woman who was afraid of ladders. Like she was afraid of walking under a ladder,
Mm-hmm.
and she had some kind of savings in a bank vault, and she had to get to the bank vault to get the savings, but there was a ladder in the way. so she wouldn't go and get the money. And she's like, it's just my superstition. I can't walk under the ladder, you know. And Florence Scovel Shinn was just kind of like, okay, we'll pray about it, you know, like send good energy to it. And I think you should go tomorrow and try. And she stopped worrying about the ladder. And then she went in. And what do you know? But that day the ladder was gone.
Mm.
Wasn't even there. And that's something I've experienced over and over and over again. And when you do it 54 times, you just get really good at it. That you learn these things you worry about, you know, that you think are really going to just cripple you or that you can't possibly make the list item happen. Half the time they don't happen. Or if they do, you can handle it. It's not that bad. So I think that's a real thing, like the law of non-resistance.
Yeah, it's like what's on the other side of fear, right? Nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I just think people are a lot more powerful than they give themselves credit for. And I don't know where it came from. I guess maybe it's evolutionary, right? Like we all belong to a tribe. So at some point, people just started learning, well, if I'm not the leader, I should tone myself down a little bit. You know, I don't know. I don't know where that comes from.
Now, how do you feel now that you've completed the list? Do you feel kind of like an emptiness?
No, I feel full. No, the opposite. Yeah, I feel like the first thing I felt was complete calm, like
Mm-hmm.
just complete peace, like unlike I've ever felt before. Because I did what I said I was going to do. I showed him the goodbye I wanted to show him, that I wanted to give him. And a lot of people struggle with that when someone dies suddenly, they don't get a chance to say goodbye. And I think sometimes that's what they're grieving for even more than the actual death. And I had this rare opportunity where I got to do that. And while doing it, I became the daughter he saw in me.
Mm.
And how often do you get to do that? Because sometimes we have grievances with our parents that we can't get over. And, you know, if you have resistance and resentment towards someone, it's really hard to become what they see in you because you're just tuning them out. You're not listening to them. So I felt a lot of peace both in that relationship and in the way he died. So that was a wonderful feeling. But now I also felt peace about my future because I felt like, well, gosh, if I could do this,
Mm.
you know, what the sky's the limit. Like, what is there left to be afraid of? And I also felt like what a blessing it is that I wrote about it, that I wrote a book about it. So even if you're a person who didn't find your father's bucket list and didn't get to go on these adventures, you get to feel like you did if you read my book. So it was so many elements that were just making me feel like, yeah, God, it's just, to me, it's just such a rare feeling to feel completely at peace, to feel like I have absolutely nothing to worry about right now. And that's real. And I'm still feeling that way. I am feeling now a little bit like, okay, now I'm a writer selling a book. So I have to be in that mode. I have to learn how to sell. But at the same time, you know, write and have a few novels published was a list item.
Right.
So part of me is like, well, maybe it's not over. Like maybe
Yeah.
I am still sort of doing this. And then, you know, he's helping me. He's still teaching me stuff. And, you know, I still find myself in situations where it's like, okay, I need to be a better person and figure this out. So I'm still growing and learning. Still, it continues, but I don't know what it is yet. And I have my own list. So that's something too that I'm working on.
Oh, nice. Now, I know you can't put a price on something like this, but how much time and money did you have to dedicate to finishing your father's list? I mean, you went to Vienna, you went to the Super Bowl, you went to the NCAA championship, or
Yeah, no, it's so funny you asked me that. I just had this feeling you were going to ask me that today. I don't know why. And I thought, oh, I'm so happy I figured that out. Like just a couple weeks ago, actually, I sat down and I went through my Google Calendar. I was like, I want to know how much was this the whole, because at some point you start losing track
yeah,
and you kind of just figure, well, it's about the same every year.
right. And again, it's not that important, the actual money price on it, but
No, I mean, I'm proud of it. I'm proud of how budget conscious I was. Because when we would travel, we would stay in like historic hotels that, you know, they're not like a boutique hotel. Like
mm,
they're not that expensive. But my reason for it was because I was always learning the history of the place because I wanted to go where my dad would have gone in
right,
1978. But yeah, all in all, I think it was about 44,000.
really,
Yeah, which I feel like for 6 years for everything I did, that's pretty good.
yeah. No, that's less than I would have thought.
I mean, the Super Bowl was by far the most expensive. That was 5,000 itself.
I mean, there were 54 items, right?
Yeah.
Less than 1,000 an item, whatever.
Hmm.
Obviously, some of the items are free. It seems like it's like such a low number considering you traveled to London, you traveled to Vienna, you traveled, even to the Super Bowl. You still had to pay money to go there. It wasn't like somebody gave you
Yeah.
these.
Yeah. I even included my foot surgery that I had to have because I
Oh,
got injured doing the tennis item. Yeah.
right.
Trust me, I thought of everything that it what added up. I mean, I did have I had a little bit of a help because my mom gave us a wedding gift that was monetary.
Mm-hmm.
So that sort of gave me seed money, as Stephen called it.
Yeah, a little head start.
Yeah. But yeah, all in all, that's about how much it cost.
Okay, so when is the book going to be actually released?
June 13th.
Is that Father's Day?
It's close. It's June
Right?
18th is Father's Day.
Oh, see, you know that. I didn't didn't know. I was just curious.
My
I was
life
like,
revolves around that week right now, Fred.
yeah, I was curious to know because I thought for sure that it would be interesting if it came out on Father's Day.
Yeah, it's just in time for Father's Day.
That's
That's
perfect.
sort of how we're pitching it. You can buy it for your dad.
Now, what are some things that you would like for people to know about your book or about the list?
I think and this is something that surprised me. When I started doing it, I thought of it as a thing that might inspire people just because I considered myself such a regular person. Like I'm
Mm-hmm.
just I'm very like I didn't think there was anything interesting about my life whatsoever. Like being a journalist, you tend to think that way because you're just talking to other people all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, well, I feel like I seem very girl next door. Like I'm just kind of regular. So if people see how much I'm struggling with these list items, because I did make sure I told the truth about everything that happened when I shared
Mm-hmm.
it online. I thought if they see that, they'll be like, oh, okay, clearly I could do this too. This is open to everyone, a challenge like this. So I really looked at it that way, and I still look at it that way. One thing that started developing over time I couldn't have anticipated was all of a sudden now people are like, "Oh, you're so amazing," and how did you do all of this? And like it takes a special person to do that. And I'm thinking like, no, it really is just a person who loved someone. And I mean, I needed to do this. Like the grief I was still carrying was overpowering for me.
Mm.
The I had these unresolved things with my dad where if another man in my life, like usually my husband, if they did something that was like the thing, I would freak out. Like I would just get
Really?
like really angry, and I was projecting it because I didn't have the person alive anymore who I needed to deal with it with. So I think the book is kind of a combination of that. I think the book is like it's most of it's really fun,
Mm-hmm.
and you get to feel like you're going on these adventures, which I think since with the pandemic, people are really craving right now. And then there's the hope element because I had to be hopeful and faith driven the whole time. But also, I dealt with a lot of emotional stuff with my dad that I hadn't been able to talk about with him in person, and I dealt with it in the book, and in that way, I feel it's so much release from it that I don't have to carry it anymore. Because sometimes people just carry things for years and they don't even know that they are, and it actually just bleeds out into everything they're doing without their knowledge.
Now, how did that make you feel once you've realized that you've gone past all these things that you had to deal with your dad?
Surely there's other stuff in there. Other baggage I haven't dealt with. We're very complicated creatures. It made me feel sad that I couldn't do it while he was alive. It made me feel, just that, I don't know, it was such a blessing for me to be able to face the trauma I was carrying, look at it and say, I'm not afraid of you
Mm-hmm.
anymore. I think it makes me less prone to doing that now. Like if I encounter a situation that is emotionally painful and difficult and challenging and people who just aren't seeing eye to eye on something, I really make an effort now to just talk about it, to open up, to express what I really feel, to set a boundary if I need to. If someone's having If someone's acting in a way that is not healthy for everyone else involved, I'll stay away from that person. It's like
Mm.
I make choices I didn't make before, because before I was such a people pleaser and I lived for what everybody else wanted all the time. And I didn't realize, oh, I'm exposing myself, and it's like when I started doing this, it was so new for me that I remember I asked one of my friends who's actually is quite religious. And so because he's so religious, I tend to trust him with
Mm.
whatever advice he has. But he said, because I was like, I really want to be Christian and I want to be good to people. And am I not doing that if I'm keeping a distance from someone who is being sort of dangerous to people or whatever? And he said, he's like, part of being good to people is protecting your peace.
Mm.
Like you have to protect your peace too. And I thought that was just like, that was mind blowing to me. Like, oh, right, because what I'm giving is valuable. And how can I keep giving what I want to give if I'm not giving to myself the way I need to? So it's really, I've changed in that way. I'm much more direct. I thought I was open. I thought I was a really open person, but it turns out I wasn't. I'm much more open now.
Now, have you addressed any challenges with your family that you might have had because of this book?
Challenges. Like how so?
Well, like you were saying about the person that you knew that
Oh,
was texting and
yeah, the relative who
driving.
was texting.
Right. And then you had a little bit of a blow up on that. Have you noticed that you're a little more patient or a little more understanding of other people's views and stuff like that because of all of this that you've gone through?
Yeah, I was a real pain in the ass.
I didn't want to put it that way, but
Excuse my French, but I mean, come on. No, I was. I thought I was a champion for justice. I
mm,
thought I was like, everyone needs to live this, like I know what's right. And if you're not doing what's right, like,
hmm
I mean, I had a relative who didn't want to wear a mask during the pandemic, and I really came down hard on him and was like, I can't talk to you, and I don't know. I think I didn't know. Like I didn't know that people probably were somewhat afraid of me because I was such a goody two shoes, but like a goody two shoes on the rampage. And yeah, I'm a lot. I think that all goes with it, right? Like if I'm more at peace with myself and with the decisions I'm making, then I'm going to be more peaceful with other people. And certainly going vegan played a huge part in that for me, because it's like a lot of people don't understand it. A lot of people judge it and think, why that seems like an impossible diet or, way of life. And I don't like talking about it all the time because I worry people will think I'm being judgmental of them, and I'm not.
hmm
I think it's just like, live and let live. Like you make your choices with how you want to live your life, and you present to others. At least I try to present to others now, seeing their light, trying to see their light and the best parts that are in them. I mean, I've always been an optimist. I've always been, some might say, kind of naive. Like I see the best in people more than anything else. But now I try to like not see something that they might be struggling with or something I disagree with in the same way that I used to. Like I just don't give it the same weight that I used to. We're not here to be perfect. We're all learning.
Do you feel that that was the lesson that your father has finally taught you?
Maybe. I mean, it certainly has helped me with myself. I mean, I was the hardest on me,
Right.
you know, more than anyone else. And it certainly has helped me with like, like I've struggled with time my whole life. Like since I can't even remember a time that I've been alive where I wasn't like 10 minutes late to something, you know. And that's like, I mean, like being a little girl and being, I remember my mom would be like, oh, let's get dressed really fast. It's like a race. Like she would try to make it fun for
Mm.
me. But really, I'm just, my brother told me once, I'm a type F personality as opposed to type A, like I'm just gonna take my time and like be very daydreamy about everything I do. And at a later age, I learned like, oh no, that's a thing called ADD. That's what I actually have. But being that way, you're kind of always getting into situations where you're disappointing people, or sometimes I've lost friendships because of it. I lost jobs because of it. Because when
Mm.
I was very young, I didn't have a good grip on it. I've had to learn lots of coping techniques over the years to make sure that I'm showing up and I'm not letting that part of me take over. And I mean, that's one part of it. But then the other part of it is just being easier on yourself. It's, I'm sure that everybody has something like a tendency to be late. I'm lucky that it's that. I'm lucky it's not a worse thing that's a hang up for me. But the easier I am with myself about it and the more grace I give myself, I think the easier it is for me to function and to be successful and to be happy. And certainly my dad would have wanted me to learn that because he was probably the person I kept waiting the most. Because he would come to the house twice a week to pick us up and he would have to sit in the car and wait until I was ready. So, but he also didn't care. It wasn't a big deal. He was the only person who never got mad at me for it. Like he'd be like, "Oh, Laura, it's not a fashion show," you know.
That's great.
Yeah, he was funny. I miss his humor the most.
Yeah, that was my next question. What do you miss most, and what did this list make you reflect on his life the most?
It was that when people give you their time, it's so much more valuable than money.
Mm.
I mean, if you'll notice earlier, you asked me what was the time you spent on this and what was the money you spent, and I somehow conveniently didn't answer the time question. I answered
noticed.
the money question pretty easily, right?
Uh-huh.
And my dad wasn't wealthy, and in some ways didn't contribute to certain things. He didn't pay for my college education. My mom paid for that completely. There was an age I reached where I realized that this was happening, that my mom was kind of the heavy with that stuff and I would think like, oh, that's not right. Like what's the deal here? Like, am I not valuable to him? And it was something I really struggled with for a long time and started to shape my own life as an adult that way. Like I need to be the person who's doing really well financially at all times. And it didn't occur to me that until I started doing this project, that really the precious gift that we have to give other people is our time, and not only our time, but our attention, and our presence. And my dad just had that, like I still don't understand how he did it. Like, I don't know where he learned it from because I know his parents weren't that way. I mean, his mom might've been, I never got to know my grandmother because she died when I was a baby, but I know his dad wasn't like that. He was kind of like a drill sergeant with his kids. So, I mean, it might have been a thing he was doing intentionally to be the opposite of what he was raised with. But he was a salesman, so he was really good with people. And when my brother and I would be with him, even if it was just those 2 times per week, it was quality. It was like we had an adult who was very invested in our lives and what we were doing. And not just because he missed us, but because he just genuinely wanted us to be happy and wanted to teach us. So that's what I miss the most. So I think that's probably why that's what the list gave me. Like each list item was like a lunch with dad in a way. Like sometimes I called it the school of dad, which is very different than the school I was in. And yeah, just I think particularly now at the times we're living in, I've had people say to me things like, oh yeah, like just the other day, my friend was like, oh, I saw you when you were on NBC News and I took a picture of the TV. Here it is. I forgot to send it to you. And now it's like 2 months later, and she's like, isn't that just how we are now? Like we have so many tabs open on our computer and we have so many texts and it's like, you mean to do something, you totally forget. Like, it's like, that's how our communication is set up these days.
Right.
And, both in practice and I think on the inside, internally, I was learning that from him doing this, how to slow down, how to really be there when I'm there. If I wasn't really there for each one of these list items, I wouldn't have gotten it because there's so many subtle things that would happen. And in that way, I'm becoming somewhat of an alien creature around all other people. No, I mean, but what I'm recognizing now, though, is what a gift it is that when I do meet new people and I'm channeling that, I'm channeling how he was, it's welcome and refreshing for them, I think.
It's basically improved your own life by completing this list because he's still teaching you things that you didn't know you needed to know.
Yeah, so much of it is things he was doing intentionally the whole time that I didn't know he was. And I have found notebooks of his where he was citing his sources, like his mentors, like these authors he loved. And now I have like this library of, books that I've been researching. Oh, where did he get this idea from? And now I understand, oh, he was inspired by Napoleon Hill, and Napoleon Hill cared about the value of thought, and
Mm-hmm.
he actually, he was the kind of person who was always talking about being better. And he used to talk about the value of selfishness, which I never understood at the time. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like we're
Mm.
supposed to be like selfless and like giving to other people all the time. But what he really meant was the value of learning who you are and becoming the best version of yourself. And yeah, so these are things that were very conscious for him that I think he would be proud that I figured out. I mean, really, the whole thing has been like a puzzle, and I love puzzles.
Yeah.
Or almost like a treasure hunt. Sometimes it feels like there's a map I'm following.
Yeah. Such a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for taking the time. What is the best way for people to get your book, My Father's List, How Living My Dad's Dreams Set Me Free, and follow you on social media?
It's available for pre-order. So you can go to buylauracarney.com. That's my website. It's BY. Sometimes people think it's BU. No, it's BY, lauracarney.com. But starting June 13th, you can go to any bookstore pretty much and pick it up.
Thanks again, Laura, for being on Plant Your Seed, and congratulations on your book and continued success.
Oh, thank you so much, Fred. I was so happy to talk to you.
Hope you are inspired by this story, and remember, it's never too late to plant your seed. Links to everything we talked about on the podcast can be found on Instagram at plant.yourseed in the show notes tab in the bio. If you enjoyed the show, remember to leave us a review, and until next time, thank you for listening.